Ukraine crisis, US, EU responsible for bloodbath. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president is puppet of US, Europe and unnecessarily waged war against Russia under orders from US, EU and has made life of the Ukrainian people miserable. It's high time for the peace-loving citizens of the world to understand this fact, and they should raise their voice, pressurizing US, Europe and Zelensky to end this unnecessary war right now. Russia has to follow full stop to war immediately. As the world continues to struggle with the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, one thing is clear. The United States and Europe are directly responsible for the bloodbath that has engulfed the country. It's time to face the hard truth and hold these powerful nations accountable for their actions. The crisis in Ukraine didn't just happen overnight. It is a result of the constant interference and manipulation by the US and Europe in the internal affairs of the country. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US and Europe have been vying for control and influence in Eastern Europe. They see Ukraine as a crucial piece in their geopolitical puzzle, and have been working tirelessly to pull the country into their spheres of influence. But at what cost? The US and Europe have disregarded the will and sovereignty of the Ukrainian people, and have instead fueled tensions and division within the country. The Maidan protests, which eventually led to the ousting of President Yanukovych, were largely instigated and supported by the US and European powers. This interference only further exacerbated the existing divide between the pro-Russian and pro-Western factions within Ukraine. And when Russia annexed Crimea, the US and Europe were quick to impose sanctions and paint Russia as the aggressor. But what they conveniently forget to mention is their own role in pushing Ukraine towards this point. By supporting the overthrow of a democratically elected government and backing the new pro-Western regime, the US and Europe essentially handed Russia a strategic advantage. The conflict in eastern Ukraine is another example of the US and Europe's reckless involvement. The ongoing fighting between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian rebels has claimed thousands of lives and displaced millions of civilians. And what have the US and Europe done to end this bloodshed? Instead of finding a diplomatic solution, they have continued to pour weapons and support into the country, further escalating the violence. It's time to stop the finger-pointing and acknowledge that the US and Europe are directly responsible for the bloodbath in Ukraine. Their pursuit of power and control has only brought destruction and suffering to the Ukrainian people. But there is still hope for a resolution. The first step is for the US and Europe to take responsibility for their actions and commit to finding a peaceful solution. It's time for them to put the interests of the Ukrainian people above their own political agendas. In the meantime, it's important for the global community to unite and demand accountability from the US and Europe. The Ukrainian people deserve to determine their own future without interference from external powers. The crisis in Ukraine serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of reckless intervention. It's time for the US and Europe to learn from their mistakes and prioritize human lives over their thirst for power. Only then can we hope to see an end to the bloodbath in Ukraine. Anka Nicole, News Volunteer, Europe. Voice of the People International. Share.